All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're demystifying a concept called human performance technology, or HPT for short. We are going to trace its pretty fascinating roots and uncover exactly how some pioneering thinkers turned it into a practical, no-nonsense blueprint for getting real results in the workplace. If you've ever found yourself totally tangled up in the debate over what actually drives human performance in a corporate setting, well, you're definitely not alone. Historically, this field has really struggled to define itself, which is kind of wild when you consider it's produced some of the most powerful methodologies for organizational change out there. So today, we're going to unpack that history, look at the frameworks that came out of it, and give you a crystal clear understanding of what HPT is all about.
To really get a grip on this, we've got to start with a brilliant question posed back in 2002 by Guy Wallace. He asked, "What's inside our box and what's outside?" Now, this perfectly captures the deep identity crisis that was facing the International Society for Performance Improvement, or ISPI at the time. Picture this: after decades of practice, they were literally still struggling to define their exact value proposition. Over 85% of their members were in the performance-based instruction business, but they knew deep down that instruction was just one small slice of the performance pie. They were constantly asking themselves, what exactly are the other non-instructional pieces? Does our field include quality control, ergonomics, organizational development? What about finance? Because think about it, if they couldn't clearly define their own boundaries to their own members, how on earth could they market their value to the rest of the corporate world?
So let's head into Section 1, Flashback to the 60s, the discovery phase. To understand how they got into this identity crisis in the first place, we actually have to rewind to the 1960s. See, this field wasn't some stuffy theory born in an academic ivory tower. Not at all. It was forged right in the trenches of intense corporate consulting and problem solving. Almost all of the core discoveries happened in a super tight window between 1958 and 1969, driven by pioneers like Geary Rummler, Dale Breathauer, and Tom Gilbert. In 1962, the Center for Programmed Learning for Business gets founded at the University of Michigan. Fast forward to 1964, and the Human Performance System model is developed, basically recognizing that learning didn't always equal better on-the-job performance if the environment was flawed. By 1965, they're running training systems workshops that introduce organization maps and this revolutionary idea of replacing the traditional training department with a performance department. And then, by 1970, formalized methodologies like the performance audit are launching. This whole era was just absolutely explosive with innovation because these practitioners were out there actively trying to solve real-world client problems.
But here's where it gets messy. Because these thinkers were essentially rival consultants, they were fiercely trying to build up their personal brands. And that led to some legendary rivalries over whose consulting methodology was the absolute best. You had Tom Gilbert and his company Praxis heavily pushing the performance audit, while Joe Harless was out there branding his version as front-end analysis. Meanwhile, Bob Mager had published his own methodology on analyzing performance problems. These guys were competing for massive, lucrative corporate contracts, like with the Bell system, and because of that, they were constantly spinning, renaming, and repackaging the exact same variables that influence human behavior. This intense branding war, that is largely why the field ended up with such a massive identity crisis years later. Everyone literally had a different trademarked name for the exact same concepts.
All right, moving on to Section 2, the blueprint, and the 3 performance variables.
Let's fast forward a bit to 1983. Geary Rummler stepped up with a structural solution to this ongoing identity crisis that cut straight through all that marketing fluff. He plotted out a definitive framework, and he started with one singular, clear objective: the improved performance and effectiveness of individuals. Rummler basically argued, hey, if everyone can simply agree that this is our ultimate shared goal, then everything else will just naturally fall into place. And to hit that shared objective, he identified that there were really only 3 major variables that you need to manipulate. Here is the absolute crucial takeaway. Manipulating performance is not just about throwing more training at people. It requires a completely holistic approach. So those 3 variables are: number 1, changes in the individual's repertoire. This is your classic instruction or training. Number 2, support of the individual right there in the work environment. Think job aids, checklists, the actual tools they use on the floor. And number 3, changes in the work environment itself, meaning, are expectations clear? Are the consequences aligned? Are they getting good feedback? Do they have the right resources? Think about it. If you only train someone but then drop them back into a totally broken environment with terrible feedback loops and 0 job aids, their performance is simply not going to improve. You've got to address all 3 variables. Which brings us to Section 3, the universal change process.
Okay, so knowing those three variables is awesome, but how do organizations actually implement them to achieve measurable day-to-day results? Well, Rummler laid out a visual roadmap of a universal change process. And what's so powerful about this is that the process holds true no matter what specific intervention you're applying. Seriously, whether you're rolling out a brand new software system, overhauling a manufacturing protocol, or just tweaking a sales script, the fundamental mechanics of changing human behavior in an organization follow this exact same path. If you step through this exact flow, starting with the initial analysis of needs all the way down to the final evaluation, you see exactly where the magic happens. First, needs are analyzed. Then, interventions are selected. But pay attention to step 3, intervention designed and developed. This right here is where those three variables, changing the repertoire, supporting the behavior, and changing the environment, actually live. They are the absolute core of the design phase. From there, those designs get implemented and then evaluated. It's clean, it's logical, and it is an incredibly robust system. And finally, our last section, a framework for the future. So, how did all this actually solve that identity crisis we talked about earlier? Well, instead of endlessly debating who gets to be in the club and trying to draw strict borders around human performance technology, Rummler argued for a totally inclusive approach. He envisioned a model that unites literally any technology that contributes to improved individual performance. Rather than shutting out methodologies based on some arbitrary definition, he pushed for an inclusive federation of contributing technologies. Basically, if an approach, whether it comes from ergonomics, psychology, or management science, demonstrably helps hit that shared objective of improving human performance, then it absolutely belongs in the toolbox. Rummler tied the whole shebang together with this incredible matrix. It's a grand synthesis that basically proves how diverse research areas map perfectly onto specific practical domains. For instance, you've got research areas like learning theory, learner physiology, behavior modification, and organizational behavior. And then you have practical technology domains like needs analysis, instructional design, performance engineering, and evaluation. When you plot these out, it becomes super clear that, say, academic research and behavior modification is an absolutely vital input for doing organizational performance analysis. It directly connects the heavy academic research to real-world corporate application. And why should you care about this today? Because adopting this specific technologies framework is your ultimate defense against corporate snake oil. It gives organizations clear criteria for what actually adds value versus what's just the latest management fad. If someone pitches a new corporate training program and they can't map its research basis to a practical technology domain that actually targets the individual's repertoire, their support, or their environment, you instantly know it's fluff. It gives leaders a rigorous, no-nonsense standard for evaluating exactly how they are investing in their people. The history of this whole field shows us that the best solutions almost never come from just throwing a training manual at a problem. They come from diagnosing the entire system. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on regarding your own workplace. When you face a gap in results, are you just building training courses to check a box, or are you truly engineering holistic human performance? Take a hard look at the environment, the support systems, and the incentives you're providing, because honestly, that is where the real breakthroughs happen.